some kind of people to join on in the next 5 minutes as well, but let's get started. Thank you all for joining. I know some of our MENA members are here and some people from Southeast Asia, so thank you all for joining. Suzanne's got a really great training session for us today, which is welcomed. I know difficult conversations are having to be had around the industry, around the regions right now, so very much appreciate it, Suzanne. Thank you for joining us today. So I'm sure you all benefit from this session, and I'll get the training slides as well sent over. If anyone would like them, please do let me know.
Yeah.
So over to you, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley, and thank you to the PRCA. My name's Suzanne Gandhi. I'm from Changeosity, which is a business consultancy that transforms leadership, strategy, culture, and decision-making. But our why is that we're passionate about making corporate life better for everyone. And one of our guiding values is caring. And I assume that by joining the webinar today, you care. You care about the fact that you've probably got to have some difficult conversations with people, and you want to make sure that it inflicts least pain on both yourself and the other party. So well done for joining the webinar today and caring. So what I'm going to do is go through a slide deck, and I have made the slides quite heavy with information because when we share it, I want to make sure that, you know, you didn't just have bland slides with a couple of words on it and then you don't remember what I said, because the whole point is that you have a real takeaway of learning today. So let's begin. So our current situation with this COVID-19 pandemic is placing extraordinary demands on everybody. And because the extent of the problem is not yet really known, and we don't know how long the impact of this is going to be, we are faced with making tough decisions. And of course, the more difficult thing after making the decision is then having to communicate that difficult decision to the people that it affects. So this session is going to help you with those difficult conversations. Now, I've taken two tracks. I've taken the track of difficult conversations for people whose contracts are changing negatively, and also when somebody is not performing well and you want to get a message across to them, because that's an equally difficult conversation to have and the one that can really keep you up at night. So we'll cover both in this session. So first, if I can get my computer to work for me, there we go. Many businesses are making emergency steps because of being catapulted into a situation with little or no preparation. And because uncertainty is our new constant, we have to embrace, unfortunately, practices that are going to help for the sustainability of the businesses, but also when we do have to have difficult conversations with somebody, there is an after effect. It's like the conversation hangover. And we want to make sure that the person that you're delivering the message to becomes an advocate, not an antagonistic person to you and to your organization. So what we'll cover today will be the planning and preparation, because if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you really need to consider who it is you're talking to and what kind of response they're likely to have. And of course, that you have planned the process, and then we'll talk about how to go through the process. And there's two acronyms, one's called SPIKES and one's called HAPPY. They're little models that you can use to plan your dialogue. And then we're going to talk about how we move forward together and nurture the relationship, and just a few little things to take forward from there. So before we get into the body of the content, could I just remind everyone just to pop their microphones on mute. And if you have a question as we're going through, pop it in the chat. And what I'll do is I've got chat open. So if it's about the particular topic that I'm talking about and I can answer the question as part of the narrative, then I will. If not, I'll circle back at the end and I'll answer any questions that you might have at that point. Okay, So this is the situation we find ourselves in, uncertain. But it means that we're having to have difficult conversations with a lot of people, suppliers, customers, banks, employees, outsourced employees, you know, the part-time employees. And those conversations are going to be difficult. It might be about salary reductions or paid and unpaid leave and even redundancies. Now, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the resolution that was published in response to COVID right now. It's something you can always contact me afterwards if you need some HR advice on making sure that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. But I'm not a lawyer, I'm an HR person. More than happy to help in these areas. But when you are looking at your people costs, and that's really where the focus of today is going to be, just make sure that when you do make those changes that you're cutting away fat and not the muscle of your organization, because when you come to recover and resurrect the organization on the other side, when you get more mandates in or whatever it might be, that you're in a position to quickly scale up and fast. Let's talk a little bit more about the psychological cost, and that this is really high stress right now. It's high stress for people who are going to be keeping jobs but having to have a difficult conversation. And it's equally high stress for people who potentially are going to be losing their jobs, or there's a contractual change to their job. And already we find ourselves in this position of heightened emotion. And so when you have to break bad news to do some bad news to somebody at the moment, it's even more stressful than usual. And that the anxiety can cloud our decision making. Even more reason to make sure you've done the preparations. And we're going to focus a lot on that today. And of course, you've got the other issues of the challenge of motivating remaining staff. And that's where the feedback model of happy feedback is going to come into. So treat your outgoing staff with dignity. If there's one message you take away from today, whether you like them or you dislike them, treat any outgoing staff with dignity. They will ultimately become an advocate for your organization. Now let's talk about the people problem. When we're dealing with people, you know, we're not dealing with logical beings, especially if there's a lot of emotion there. There's going to be all these other things going on. Now, Dale Carnegie wrote the book about emotional intelligence, and we have a reptilian brain, and the reptilian brain makes a very quick judgment about somebody, whether you like them, you dislike them, or they're frankly quite forgettable, and it takes 7 seconds. So when you're thinking about the conversations that you're having with somebody, you've got to think about how they perceive you. If you don't work with them every day, maybe you're the HR person, or you know, it's not a close working relationship that you have, but also how you're perceiving them and how to be conscious in your judgment of the person, and therefore what their likely responses are going to be. And I'm going to hopefully make that all make sense in a second. But once we know the other person and we can do it quickly, we will know how to influence them to a better outcome for everybody. So I don't know if you know the book Surrounded by Idiots. I'm not going to go into the details, but basically we have to treat others how we want to be treated if we want to be effective at influencing them. And of course, sometimes we go through life thinking, what's wrong with everyone? Why don't they get it? I've had this feedback performance conversation with this person once or 100 times. They still don't get it. And actually, it's not them not getting you. You know, it's you not getting them as well. Because if this little box that you see down to the right-hand side sums up the different styles of people that we find in the workplace and in life, it's cross-culture, cross-gender, cross-age groups, that if we all fit into these boxes, we're part of a 25% minority. Everyone else is in the majority. So they're looking at us thinking, I don't get you. I don't understand you. You don't talk in a way that speaks to me and that I hear and that I listen. So let's go into a little bit more detail about this before we get on to the conversation, because we need to know the person that we're talking to. So if you want to influence the thoughts and actions of others, and in difficult conversations, we want to reduce tension, reduce the likelihood of a major emotional response. And if it's a performance feedback conversation, we want to get somebody to do something. We need to be able to influence their thoughts and actions. Now, of course, at either end, if you're an ask assertive person, naturally, you ask a lot of questions, you speak slowly and deliberately, and you tend to use, well, if and maybe, and you're having a difficult conversation with somebody who comes from the tell side of this continuum, very direct in their approach, they're quick and firm, and they use declarative statements like, you know, this will happen, this won't happen. If you come from the ask side and you're trying to deliver a difficult message to someone from the tell side, you are going to have to be more assertive. You're going to have to tell them. You might have to speed up your speech. Equally, if you come from the tell side and you're now going to have to give the message to somebody from the ask side, you might need to have to just slow down a bit and be more approachable and ask more questions and show more empathy. So let's move on to the other continuum that will make up our little quadrants. What you express and how you relate. So we've got the people who are coming from the task side. They will just talk about the task. They tend to be focused on facts and they hide their feelings. They don't really share them. Whereas now, if we think about the other end of that continuum, we've got people who will always go to the person first. They're more emotional, they share their emotions, and they'll openly communicate their feelings. Now, put this in the context of a difficult conversation. If you're a very task-orientated, responsive person, and you're about to break bad news to somebody who is a very emotional person, you need to be prepared that they're not going to have a reaction like the reaction you would have. In fact, they're probably going to have a reaction quite the opposite of the reaction you might have. They're going to want to talk about how they feel, and you're probably not going to want them to talk about how they feel. But you know what? In these difficult situations, this is when the person giving the bad news has to man up, unfortunately. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but we have to be the bigger person. We have to empathize to get through this process, to make it as least paining and least cruel as possible. Now, let's move on to how we put it all together. So if you're task orientated and you like to tell people what to do, let's get this done, and you're army officer like, or the stereotypical army officer, I can say that because I used to be one, then you're a driver or you're dominant, and you can also come across a little aggressive and a little unapproachable. So therefore, when you're thinking about these conversations, whether it's feedback or delivering bad news, think about your personal demeanor. Think about when the person walks in the room, are they going to see somebody who is gentle in their approach, who is going to treat them kindly? If you are coming from the tell side, but very people orientated, yes, you're going to be, very much the inspiring person, usually very talkative, but can sometimes hog the airways, sometimes talks a little too much. This is where you're going to have to be really mindful of sticking to your dialogue planner and not go off into conversation about something and not dwell on something for too long. Equally, not interrupt. From the tell side of the quadrant, this type of person is a bit of an interrupter. So then what we need to do, if we're the one giving the difficult conversations, and we come from this side of the quadrant, we need to Right? Just zip it, lock it, put it in our pocket. Absolutely try your very hardest not to interrupt the person. Even if they're saying something that's completely ridiculous or completely untrue, let them finish what they're saying and then think about circling round to correct it. Also, listening. This side of the quadrant, we're not very good at listening. So when we're having these conversations with people, when the person is talking to us or is trying to relay their message back to us, their emotion, their sorrow, their anger, whatever it might be, we have to just be quiet and listen. Because the short-term pain in these sorts of conversations of sitting in it, letting people vent their frustrations will lead to a longer-term gain. If you don't let somebody do that, they're going to remain quite frustrated and they're going to become that antagonist I was talking about. Now, of course, it's something to think about that if you come from the other side of the quadrant and you're going to be having to deliver a message to somebody who is sort of driver dominant or expressive, inspiring, you've got to think about the fact that they're going to start interrupting you. Now, this is tricky because you're trying to convey a message to them and they're going to keep interrupting and they're going to try and derail your thought process and what you were going to say. So go back to that dialogue planner that we're going to come onto in a while. Keep it there, keep notes, and make sure you stick to the path that you need to stick to in order to get through the meeting. Let's move around to the people who ask a lot of questions, are very people orientated. These are the guys, they are they're the glue that sticks the team together. They're your true team players. They like harmony. They want everyone to get along. Sometimes they can be perceived as easy to be overridden, you know, but that's actually not the case. But what they do is when they are in a position of heightened tension, heightened conflict, they will tend to agree. And that doesn't mean to say they necessarily do agree. They will just say yes, yes, yes to get the conversation over and done with, to get you to stop talking and to stop the pain, to get out of there. So it's something, again, to consider. They're going to be in a really painful situation. They're not necessarily going to be so open about telling you. So if you're coming especially from the direct diagonal opposite the driver dominant, a driver really does need to make themselves more approachable, more emotional, more empathetic. And then we come on to the analyticals. Now, our analyticals are our spreadsheet knights. They're the ones that get right into the detail and they want to know all the details because they're going to ask a lot of questions. It doesn't make them talkative as such. What it does mean, it may make you feel like they're argumentative. They ask a lot of questions. They won't show much emotion either, so they'll have a pretty much poker face and you won't know what's going on in there. But because they're not showing emotion, doesn't mean to say they're not really hurting inside. So it's something to be mindful of when you're having a difficult conversation with someone who is analytical. They might want to go through the details. They might want to get the documentation, the policies, the procedures, the contract before they agree to anything, before they sign anything. That's within their rights to do that. So play the long game with an analytical. Deliver the message, let them go away and do all their analysis on everything. Then have a time when you come back and you reconvene. Now, the reason why I say the styles are so important is having had more difficult conversations I care to remember. I've had to deliver bad news to the parents of soldiers. I've been in HR for many, many years and unfortunately had to make more people than I care to think of redundant. knowing the social style, knowing the style of the person you're going to be talking to is really key about how you manage that conversation. Now you think, well, how do I know? You know, I might not have met this person, or I don't really interact with them that much. You know, they're from someone else's team and I'm just being asked to go into the meeting. Whatever it might be, you can quickly identify them by their body language as well. Not what just they say, but how they are when they walk into the room. So somebody whose driver might come into the room and say, you know, good morning, sit down, not much emotion. And when they get angry, they're probably more likely to lean forward. Again, have really straight eye contact with you, you know, sort of like the laser eyes, and you think, oh my God. Whereas someone who is more expressive, when they walk into the room, you say good morning, oh, good morning. You know, and even though they know they're probably going to be walking into a really horrible meeting, they'll still say, how are you? How's the family? Everything okay? And you're thinking, oh my God, I'm just about to tell this person some horrible news. That's the way they are. They'll also use bigger gestures, and they'll also use many more facial expressions than any of the other styles. And then we've got the amiable, stable guys and ladies. And when they walk into the room, they'll be reserved, but they'll be friendly. They'll keep eye contact, but it won't be the scary laser eyes of the driver, and it won't be the overly expressive of our inspiring yellows. But they'll come across gently and kindly. And then you have your analyticals. Now, analyticals aren't great at keeping eye contact. That's one thing to look out for. They also sit very still and sometimes can have quite a monotone voice. So now when you're thinking about these styles and you're thinking, right, I've got to deliver bad news to a member of my team, and they are the life and soul of the office. And sometimes, you know, it does annoy people because they don't know when to shut up. Okay, they're probably inexpressive. If you're thinking, okay, I've got to have a conversation with this person, and okay, they love working on their own, they love getting into the spreadsheets, they're often a little bit behind on deadlines because they want to make sure whatever they give me is perfection. They have a bit of a poker face, it can almost be a little, if I say, sort of more conservative, then they're more likely to be analytical. If the person's a driver, they come in and they say, right, boss, I'm getting this, and this done. And, you know, when you have conversations with them, sometimes they leave you with that feeling of, ouch, well, I didn't need to say it that harshly. Then they're probably a driver. And then if they're amiable, like I said, they're the glue that holds your team together. They are an amazing team member, and they're sort of the ones that are loved by all. Now let's put this into the reaction that someone has when they get bad news. There's 3 types of reaction people can have. There's the fight response, anger, frustration, shouting, standing up, all these things. Telling you that you're wrong, open denial. Then you have the flight response. And that's the people who just sit there quietly and they nod. And then they just want to get out of that room as quick as possible. And you know that they're just dying on the inside, but they don't want to talk to you about it. And they might have some tears from the amiables, but they'll hold themselves together for the course of that meeting just to get out of there. And then everything you say, they'll just say yes to. Okay, yes. Okay, yes. And then you have the active response. Now, these are the people who are just taking what you're telling them and there's no emotion. It's not because they're suppressing emotion or they're not emotional. It's because they know it's coming. They've known for a while. Or in a performance feedback conversation, they're aware that their feedback's not been great and basically, that their performance has not been great and they're expecting this. So now let's put it back in the social styles. And we have our drivers when they feel like stuff is out of control, and expressives when they're not getting recognition or they're getting quite the opposite, criticism. Then the drivers get autocratic, the expressives attack, and you've got your fight response side of the quadrant. On the other hand, with our amiable acquiescing, that's basically saying yes to everything even if they don't agree, and our analyticals avoiding, that's our flight response. So now, before you have your difficult conversation, or you even plan for your difficult conversation, have a think. Okay, the social style, so I'm going to have to expect certain things from that social style naturally, and then if it goes pretty bad and they don't take it very well, these are the sorts of outcomes that I'm likely to have to deal with at the time. So let's get into the two types of meeting that I'm going to cover on this session. The first one is bad news, like breaking really bad news. And the other one is feedback on poor performance. Now, no one likes to be told that they're not as good as they think they are. So, bad news. A process that I learned years ago and then was reminded of when I was head of HR at a trauma centre, it's like an emergency room. It's something that the medical profession use, and it's called spikes. And what this is just a go-to aid memoir of what you have to do when you're giving bad news. Now, we're not having a conversation here in a way that the feedback conversation would go. This is, you have to tell somebody something that's not going to change. Right? They're being made redundant. That's not going to change. Their salary's been reduced. That's a decision that's been made. This is where you have to get a message across, but you have to do it as kindly as possible, with the least pain and cruelty inflicted on the individual. So I'm going to take you through how to set up, do the mental and physical rehearsals, how to understand what they know, so you can tailor what you say to what they know. Then you've got to find out what their communication preference is. Is it deal with everything in the meeting there? Do they want it in writing? You know, how do we move forward? How you share the knowledge of what you know. The emotional responses of the different people that we've already touched a little bit on already with the fight and flight. And then planning the steps forward. So let's start with the setup. Okay. Bad news is really stressful to give, and it's really, really difficult to take. If you know the style of the person, you can influence them. So if they're a driver, for example, you can expect certain responses. If they're an amiable, you can prepare for certain responses. You need to expect frustration and negativity. Some people don't, right? And you can get through a redundancy meeting in under 10 minutes because they've got nothing to say. They knew it was coming. Just give me the letter. Let's get on with it. Try to start. Other people, it can take an hour and a half. The time spent at that point, letting them vent, letting them blow off steam, expressive style probably, then it means that that person in the end is not going to be an antagonist for you. It might even end up being an advocate for you. Okay, so a few things on your checklist. Have you arranged a private space? A meeting room with a door that can be shut and a sign that says occupied. You don't want people doing the whole walking in, oh, sorry, I thought I'd booked this meeting room. Even if you have to have somebody milling around and doing their work outside the meeting room to stop anyone opening that door, you have to give this person dignity of your full attention. Then you need to make sure you're involving the right people. Now, if it's a contractual change, you should have a witness there in the conversation, preferably from HR. In some cases where I felt that someone was going to react really badly because they were already acting aggressively, I've had a security guard milling around outside just in case, because people can kick off if they're really not happy about something. So it's just something to be mindful of. I don't want to scare anybody, but spending time on those social styles will mean you'll probably be in a better place to understand the kind of reaction and the kind of preparation you need to do, and who needs to be in the room. Be careful you don't involve the wrong person. And by this I mean somebody the other person distrusts, dislikes, that's going to immediately put their back up when they walk into the room, or somebody who is very, very junior, because that's just embarrassing, belittling, and having had to let go everyone from the CEO right down to the cleaner, you can make mistakes here by having the wrong people in the room. So just make sure you're involving the right people. And then if you can do this, arrange the seating to remove any barriers. Once there's a barrier, that, like a table in the middle, like a high table, you know, and you're sat opposite sides of it, like, I don't know, divorce proceedings or something, that immediately creates tension. So if you can sit at the end of the table, you know, almost sort of diagonally next to the person, if you have a table. If you don't have a table, great, just a low table or something, just to arrange the space to make it less confrontational. Then manage your time. If you've set a meeting with somebody for 20 minutes, but you know they're expressive or amiable, you might want to extend that. And also you want to make sure that you don't get any interruptions. So put your phone on silent. Make sure people know what the meeting is, those people who can know. So like I said, have someone, maybe if you're HR from your team, milling around outside, just making sure no one interrupts. And then this is the number one key when you're giving people contract changes. Double check the paperwork. Don't just take the paperwork from the HR person or the office manager and trust them that everything's in good order. The last thing you want to do is take documentation out of the envelope and see it's got the wrong name on it, or it's something, you know, a salary reduction that's not the correct salary reduction. So it sounds obvious, but these are all the pitfalls that immediately create tension. And what you want to do when breaking bad news is reduce all that tension, all that emotion. Because if someone's tense, they go into self-preservation. Self-preservation is fight and flight, and we don't want that. Okay, next is perception. You've got to find out what they know, right? Because, I mean, if you're giving somebody, say, for example, in the medical profession, a cancer diagnosis, and they don't have a clue, you're going to have a lot longer conversation with somebody than someone who already knows. They already know the news. It's the same walking into a meeting. You know, if they've heard everyone else's salary has been cut by half, then they ask them, say, do you know why we're having this meeting today? Now, some people will say, yes, I know, I guess my name's on the list, I'm being made redundant. Some people will say, no, I have no idea. When you damn well know they do know, you've got to play the game. The next thing is, based on the information they tell you, you can quickly detect if they've been told something that's not right, or if their imagination has run away with them. So, you know, they might walk in and see paperwork on the table and think they're being made redundant, whereas actually you're going to go through a conversation of salary reduction with them. So you need to quickly change any information that they have and correct it. So you can swiftly tailor the discussion. And also this is where you can start determining if people are in denial, if they're hoping this is not happening to them, if they're pretending that their performance wasn't so bad and they had absented themselves from the office for such a long time that they'd still have a job. It's all these things. Oh, you know, that wasn't me. Oh, I didn't do that. No, I didn't steal that. No, I wasn't late. You're thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've got a whole body of evidence that says that you are. But anyway, you've got to assess people's level of unrealistic expectation, because this is a process and you've got to work out how much you want to get into the nitty-gritty detail if a decision's already been made. Is it worth the pain to get into the unfavorable details if that's just going to raise the person's level of self-preservation response? So think about it. If you've got a really poor performer that you're basically terminating, do you want to go into the fact that their behavior is shocking, that they are rude, that the clients despise them? Or do you want to focus on the fact that they'd absented themselves out of the country for a long period of time, and that you've been on a performance improvement plan and we've unfortunately drawn to the end of that? Two different conversations, same end. Sometimes some things don't need to be said in these difficult conversations, especially if it's a performance termination conversation. Okay, let's move on to the invitation. Now, this is where we're going to invite somebody, especially in the case of redundancy, how they want to be told. So you can say, look, once you've obviously set the scene, you know, would you like to look at the documentation, or would you like me to talk you through it first? The driver might say, oh, just give it to me straight. Okay, well, that's unfortunate, but an analytical would say, can I see that documentation, please? Knowledge. This is where you've got to share your knowledge, but you can reduce the impact by saying, unfortunately, I have some bad news to tell you, or I'm sorry to tell you that. Better than saying, you're being made redundant, or we're terminating your contract. Unfortunately, I have some bad news to tell you. Despite the performance improvement plan that you've been on and the steps that we've tried to take together, I'm sorry to tell you that the meeting that has been called today for me to issue you with your termination of notice, termination of contract notice. So it's just giving that little buffer. You're going to tell them anyway, but if you shock someone, you get a reaction, and that's self-preservation, fight, flight. If you ease them into it, then you get a response, which is usually more brain, less emotion. And then you can actually move through the conversation. Okay, give facts. Really don't use technical words. You know, some people don't even know what redundancy means, because in the UAE, it's only recently been bandied about officially since this resolution was issued. They might not know what redundancy, so especially for people who, you know, probably don't know what that means, you need to explain it to them. And also avoid excessive bluntness. And I'm looking at you guys, the drivers and the analyticals. Be gentle in your approach. Be kind. Treat the person with dignity. It doesn't cost you anything, and it makes the world of difference. Okay, and then emotions. The emotional response, as I said, the flight is going to be silence and acquiescence and wanting to get out of that meeting as quick as possible, or the fight, denial, anger, frustration, tears, shouting, you name it. So the way to respond, first with empathy, and to do that, you need to observe them. And you need to look for signals that this person's really not okay with what you've just told them. Some people just take it on the chin. They knew it was coming. Give me the letter, sign what I need to sign, get me out of here. I'm going on my garden leave. Other people will start shaking. That's a sign of adrenaline. Fight-flight response. Sweating is a sign of a light and a speeded up heart rate. Again, that's fight-flight. Fidgeting. You know the legs, when people's legs start jumping, their knees, they do that wiggly leg thing. I don't know what the name of it is called, like moving legs. That's another thing. looking away, blinking, head in hands, all these things are because the adrenaline is flowing through their body, and that's self-preservation, animal kingdom, fight, flight, and this is where you need to identify and then connect with them and try and reduce the tension. I know you're probably very upset. Let's take a moment and just give people silence. Some people will cry, so make sure you have tissues available. Like I said, some people will sweat and shake, so make sure you have water available for people. And then connect with them. You know, your facial expression should be one of empathy, not one of just hurry up and get over your emotional response because I've got another meeting to have. I've got to do 20 of these today. Take the time as a human being. And in this moment, people, I always say, if you look at somebody in that moment as if they're a child, an upset child, it helps you if you're not one who can elicit an empathetic response easily. If you really feel for them, then naturally you're going to show empathy. And that's all they need in that moment. Somebody who's having to deliver a message, but that they do actually care. Okay, and finally, until that emotion is cleared, it's very difficult to move forward. I have given people a break in a meeting when I've delivered bad news. I've said, look, you're clearly very upset. You probably want to phone your other half or something. So how about you just stay in the meeting room, take a few minutes. I'll just wait outside and you come and get me when you're ready and we can carry on the conversation. That's if they clearly don't want you around. Some people will say, look, can I just phone my husband or can I just phone my wife? So be prepared for those sorts of things, but don't just then leave them. Just hang around outside, because then they'll know that you're hanging around outside and they'll kind of pull themselves together a little bit faster and you can complete the conversation to go to the steps forward. Now, if you're coming from the amiable and the expressive side, the bottom of the quadrant, the people side, this is hard enough to give this sort of news to somebody because of that connection with people, but be careful not to waver on what you've said. You know, when someone says, oh, isn't there anything you can do to save my job? Well, I suppose I could speak to the boss. Nah, don't even go there. Stay true, stay assertive to what you've said to them. Say, look, I'm really sorry, but the decision has been made. Some people might say, well, I'm good. Can I raise it to my department head? And that's when you have to remind people that you wouldn't be in this conversation with them without their department head's knowledge. So it's stay firm. Bad news, you've got to stay firm. And establish the next steps with timelines, and perhaps don't commit to actual physical dates, but say, look, it would take about 2 weeks to process the visa, book your flights and have you out the country on a trip home. Make sure you've spoken to HR and you know exactly the process if HR is not present with you, even though they should be in these sorts of meetings, because people need to know where they stand, and you don't want to leave them moving out of that meeting with any uncertainty. They need to know they've got 1 month's notice. They'll be asked to come in 2 days before the end of that month to hand in their passport. In that month, so-and-so from HR is going to start arranging flights for them and their family. So you need to give them that certainty. It needs to be almost like setting out the steps to move forward. Ask if they have any questions or areas of clarification at that point. And then make them aware of who their point of contact will be through this change process. Now, redundancies are tricky because what you don't want is a person going back into the office environment and telling everyone that they've been made redundant. And now everyone's going, oh my God, Suzanne got made redundant. Am I next? The best thing to do is say, look, this is hard on you and we completely understand that. But what we would really ask you to do is to limit the pain on your employees today, on your team today, if you could just quietly go back to your desk and get your things. You can come in tomorrow, but it's been a shock. Take the rest of the day, and ask them to quietly leave on that particular day. The point of contact is important, because what you don't want is for them not to know. So they email Suzanne in HR, and then Sylvia and Eleanor and John and Michael and everybody else. Whereas actually it might be Suzanne who's the one who is the mobilization and exit person. So you want to make sure that there is one version of the truth of the exit process. So everyone has to know that Suzanne is dealing with that person for their exit process. Don't give any information or facts, or information that you know is not a fact, and always double check with HR. So now let's move on to feedback. I'm mindful of time, and feedback is a difficult conversation when someone's a poor performer. It's not really the essence of our training today, but I want to leave it with you, because ultimately you become in the position of having a difficult conversation with a poor performer, having to have that termination conversation, if you haven't managed to get the feedback across to them in the course of their employment. Also, this is a process that can be used on customers and suppliers as well, and children and your spouse. Just a little secret. Okay, feedback. If you want someone to listen to you and understand and agree on corrective action steps, the answers need to come from them, not you. Now, this is particularly difficult if you're naturally like a dominant driver or an expressive, because you just want to tell them. Just want to tell them why they're not performing well and where their shortcomings are. But you've told them before, and you've told them 100 times, and it hasn't changed. It's because it needs to go through the cogs of their brain and come out of their own mouth through their words. If you tell them, it's going to go in one ear and straight out the other. So let's avoid telling. You know, I think people who are quite direct in their approach, like the drivers, they will come across as critical. The expressives might try and put the feedback into a burger, you know, good news, bad news, good news. But the problem is the human brain works on what I was told first and what I was told last. So they leave that conversation thinking everything's okay, because they haven't heard the bad stuff in the middle. So amiables, they might want to avoid giving the bad feedback at all, because they don't want to start a conflict. It doesn't have to be a conflict. Feedback can be a happy process. And the analyticals may not, they may be so fact orientated, they forget that there's a human there with feelings and motivation and happiness and sadness and belonging issues. So let's go through the dialogue planner for happy. We start with highlighting the good intentions of why you're having the meeting. We ask about the fulfillment level. How are they feeling at the moment? We'll probe the questioning, probing the performance by questioning. We're going to plan steps forward, and we're going to have that, yes, I can do this feeling at the end for the individual, and for you as the manager thinking, yes, my God, that actually went really well and I've got the desired outcome. That's brilliant. Feedback is not about telling. It's actually about asking. It's about asking the right questions. Highlighting the good intention, the H of happy, is that you want to give the person assistance because you want them to achieve. They have the capability, the potential, and it's so frustrating for you as a manager to see them not being able to perform to the level that you expect of them. You tell them that you really believe that they have the ability to make positive change, that sustaining the current behaviours is challenging for everyone else. Improving the behaviour and moving forward is challenging for them, so you're there to help. And then you care. You care about how they perform. You care about how they feel. You care about how motivated they are. Okay, so first, the caring. We're going to ask how they're doing. Now, some people, it's really difficult to get them talking. So we're going to ask questions that start with what, how, where, when, which. Do not use why. Why is judgmental. Why did you do it this way? Why wasn't this done? Okay, so we just cancel out why out of our brains. And even if on the notepad you just have those what, how, where, when, which. So you can say things like, so how are you feeling right now in your enjoyment of your role? And someone say, oh, I feel fine. Great. Okay, so on a scale, this is always my go-to one, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your current level of fulfillment in your role? I might sit there and go, say about 7. Okay, 7, that's great. How can we make it a 10? And then people think, you ask the question, you shut up. Because then the person speaks after the uncomfortable silence. Don't break first. They'll sit there. Oh, it's hard for us drivers and expressives. Leave the uncomfortable silence, sit in it, and wait for them to speak. Then you can get into asking about their performance. But this is the point where you find out if something else is up, right? Something else is up. I'm going to swiftly move through the rest because I know that we're short on time. Then you've got to think about, well, hang on a minute, if they said they're a 7, but it turns out that they're really unhappy in their role, they don't get the support, there's obstacles all around them, they're actually having really quite a horrible time at home. Now I understand why their performance is suffering. Then you start probing into the performance. Okay, where did you find you were really successful in the progress towards your goals? What did you find in this particular goal that you've been really passionate about? But where have you found it difficult to motivate yourself? And what would you do differently? And all these questions. These are great at before performance appraisal, because performance appraisal shouldn't be a shock. In those conversations that you're having with people when you see their performance nosediving, don't leave it and pretend it's going to go away, especially the amiables will do this and the analyticals will avoid confronting the problem. Use these nice questions to get the conversation going, because once you get the conversation going, the person is coming out the person's mouth, they're now starting to say, oh yeah, I would do this differently next time. Oh yeah, I would have acted on that a bit faster. Oh yeah, I was really passionate about this, but to be honest with you, I really don't like spreadsheets and that's what's been holding me up. Once it starts coming out of their mouth, now you're on the process of making change. Okay, then you can talk about the levels of leadership, especially if you're a manager or a director giving a manager feedback about their poor management. Use John Maxwell's 5 levels of leadership. I'm not going to go into that today, but the lowest level is like command and control. What situations have forced you to get back into bad behaviors? And how do you think your colleagues rate your behavior as a role model? That's a great one if someone's really rude or aggressive in the office. And then if you can't think of a question, but you know there's more to be asked, just say, tell me more about that. And then silence. And they'll feel compelled to dig deep down in their brain and tell you something. The tell me more is my go-to safety net when I can't think of a question. Okay, now it's time to plan forward. How can we move forward from this? What can we do? How will you achieve that? What do you need? How can I support you? What might be an obstacle? And how can we manage it? By when will you commit to getting this done? What steps will you take? Not me, you. What steps will you take to develop yourself? How can you maintain a consistent level of performance, especially if you tell somebody the performance goes up and then it goes down and then you have to tell them again? Let's say, okay, well, you know, your performance went up. So what was happening there? How can we maintain that? And what are you going to do differently if, you know, if we see you, if you feel you're slipping backwards, or maybe if I identify something, how do you want me to tell you? This is great, because once you know that there is a way you can tell somebody that their performance is kind of, or they've just treated someone not in a very good way, If you've already had the conversation to say, you know, okay, can you tell me if you see my behavior dipping and if you see that I might be a bit aggressive to somebody? Well, yeah, open invite, tell them, oh, I saw you dealing with Sylvia earlier. That was a bit harsh. Oh God, was it? Oh no. Makes it so much easier. What would you like me to do if you identify yourself slipping back? And this is where you have the, yes, I can do it. Make sure you agree the plan. I would also suggest that in the meetings, you have a laptop with a document open, even if it's just your standard performance review or it's a catch up or whatever it is, but make some bullet point notes and send it to them before the meeting even ends. So they sit next to you. I say, okay, so this is what we've discussed. These are the areas for improvement. We're agreed on this as the plan forward, type, 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 type. Okay, I'm going to send this to you now because we're agreed, correct? Correct. Okay. Is there anything else? So then you can go back to the scale of 1 to 10. How committed are you? And if you feel that they're not quite there yet, don't end the meeting. Go back to the getting into their emotions again, because something hasn't quite set in their brains. So go through the process again. Short-term pain, a meeting like this could literally take 1.5 hours to 2 hours. Short-term pain, long-term gain. Remember, if you're driver or expressive, don't interrupt them. This is where you really have to ask a question and get comfortable with that uncomfortable silence. And if you come from the analytical or the amiable side of the quadrant, this is where you're going to have to really push yourself out of your own comfort zone with asking those questions and following them up and staying true to the process of getting this person to come to terms with their poor performance. So let's go into the summary. 3 minutes to go, and then there'll be time for questions. I'll hold on. Preparation prevents your own poor performance. Now, if we're looking at giving feedback, or if we do like difficult conversations, you want to make it as easy as possible on yourself, as well as easy as possible on the other person. So, prepare. Prepare. Use the models. Use happy for feedback. Use spikes for difficult conversations where a decision's been made and it's not changing. Remember, the person who asks the question controls the conversation, and this is especially true in feedback. Be prepared for meetings to take time. You are going to feel awkward. You are going to feel uncomfortable. But if you're feeling awkward and uncomfortable, you're probably doing something right. Stick with the process. Make sure you set the meeting environment, both for feedback and spikes, as non-confrontational, and turn off the phones. So, afterwards, how do we move forward together? Keep clear, friendly, and regular contact, but make sure it's verbal contact. If you're the line manager, and yes, you've handed it over to HR, you still want to be checking in with that person. They're still your employee during the garden leave period. Garden leave is where people make decisions whether they're going to take their employer to court or not. You as a line manager can help your employer by checking in with that person. Ring them and say, look, you know, it's been a few days since we had our conversation. I just wanted to check in with you. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to say, I'm really sorry, or, oh, I can't believe they made that decision, or, you know, what can, yeah. No, I'm just checking in with you. Don't offer any help, don't offer anything, just say I'm checking in. But you know what? That's going to mean the world to that person. Even after all that you've been through, you still care, and they've still got an ally in the organisation. Have all communication backed up in writing. Salary reductions need to be pre-agreed. So you can't reduce someone's salary without having got their signature on a piece of paper saying that they know that their salary is going to be reduced and that they agree to it. Tricky, but if you want more advice about that, my details will be at the end of this presentation. Give timelines and outcomes. Timelines don't give dates, it'll take about 2 weeks, it'll take about 3 days. Provide support where you can, but don't overpromise something that you can't deliver. Now, as an employer, you need to make sure you're leveraging your rights, but also you're fulfilling your obligations as an employer, because you don't want any decisions to come back around and bite you on the behind. Okay, so know their style, know your style, and you're the one who has to modify your behavior. Not them, you. Use happy and spikes. Remember, short-term pain, long-term gain. You want an advocate, not an antagonist. Thank you. That's the end of the training. My contact details are there, but I'll share this slide pack with you in any case. I am going to open up the chat, and I welcome you to ask me some questions. There's a great one already. Are there personality tests that indicate these types of personalities? It would be good to give out to our employees. Absolutely, thanks, great question. There are some, basically all the main personality or personality style, behavior traits, call it what characteristics, call it what you will, it's kind of your default setting. Yes, DISC profile, DISA profile, MBTI is even built on it, but they're all quite expensive. TRACOM is another one. This is one of, from our organization's perspective, we do training on this for communication. So to help people in teams and with their clients and customers communicate more effectively. We actually have a course on this because you can't learn it all in one go. And it needs to stick. And it also needs to become a conversation in your organization. So in Changeosity, my partners and I, we know our styles. And if I'm getting a bit driver, which I do tend to, it's now sort of like, it's a known thing. I'm a driver. That's my dominant style. I'm a bit amiable, but I'm mostly a driver. And, you know, Krista or Kieran will say, Suzanne, you're being a bit driver right now. You know, or even if someone's not that style, but they're behaving in a way that is a bit difficult, you're maybe being overly analytical about something, you can say, oh, you're being really analytical right now. So that's quite useful. So yeah, contact me afterwards. Happy to help you with some more information there. And are there any other questions? I'll leave the chat open. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and hang on a second. We're in technology, right? There we go, stop sharing. And then I will wait for any more questions to come through, and I'm going to hand over to Hayley, who I hope is still there, and for her to, hang on a second, we've just found another question here. What's the best approach to deal with stubborn individuals? Oh, well, you're talking to the right person, because I'm as stubborn as a mule. Are there ways, they always believe they're right. Of course I'm always right. And it's very difficult to change their behavior. It's a really good question, thank you. Behavior change is one of the most difficult things that you, as a manager, or as somebody who is trying to change the behavior of maybe a client, or so it's the most difficult thing we have to do as human beings. And ultimately the behavior is not going to change unless the person decides it's going to change. And the way to get them to decide it's going to change is to make that come out their mouth. So use the happy feedback process and just keep asking questions. Now, also remember, you might think this person's being stubborn, but it might also be their style. They might be analytical, and actually, are they being stubborn, or are they being true to what they believe? You might think someone's a bit forthright and unmovable, whereas actually, maybe they might have an essence of being right. So there's two sides to stubbornness, but it is difficult to work with when people are stubborn. And using that process of just asking open questions. Okay, so why do you feel that? Okay, what is driving that? What obstacles have you found? Okay, why do you believe that's the right way? What other ways might there be? Remember, don't use why. But you can just ask questions until eventually it comes out their own mouth. So a good example of like cheeky questions are, if someone's always late, and when you ask them about it, they're like, I wasn't late. They were. I was in on time. Well, yeah. And then they went and to the pantry for like 20 minutes and came back, and they still hadn't. It's like 9:30 before they're even doing any work. And you can just talk to them about, what do they do when they've got a flight to catch? How do they manage to be there when they've got a flight? And you can use a scenario that in essence is the same, but it's one that they behave completely different in. So again, happy to talk to you about that in more detail on a one-to-one. Another good question we've got is, what is the best way to manage the transition from bad news meeting to final leave of personnel, especially if they have responsibilities that need to be managed? Okay, before you have the meeting and you tell them the bad news, you need to have made some preparations. And preparations would be things like getting your IT department to take a backup of their email, doing a backup of their computer files. So, you know, when someone is responsible for a large amount of work or responsible for a large amount of people, you can't expect them, after being given bad news, to then take the responsibility of sorting out the sort of the destruction, the wake of destruction that ensues. So if you're in the HR department, for example, I'd be asking, if say that the department head says, right, now these are the people we're going to have to make redundant. I say, okay, right. So within your department, division of duties, let's look at who can take on what client groups, what responsibilities, what direct reports. Also, you can, because generally when you make somebody redundant, or if it's a termination conversation, there will be a period of notice, and they're still an employee. Now, it's a bit harsh to make someone redundant and then expect them to work their notice, but you are technically within your rights to do that as an employer. What I would suggest is you sort of hold it as a point of motivation, is that these are the aspects that need to be handed over. You know, we don't know your job as well as you know your job. But what we would like you to do is do a handover process before you go on garden leave. If you can do it in a day, great. If you can do it in a week, fine. And you sort of give the empowerment over to the individual, but you don't let them leave until you have proof that they've done the handover. So say, for example, with somebody on my team, I might say, okay, I'm pretty aware of the extent of your day-to-day responsibilities, but what I'd like you to do is just calendarize the year of, you know, particular things like health insurance renewal and the start of the comp and bends process, for example. And then you might also say, and with respect to your direct reports, can we sit together with the organisation chart and look at how we can best move those people? And then what I'd like you to do is just send me a synopsis of all the things that you're going to hand over and who you're going to hand them over to. And once they've done that, you take a look at it and just make sure that they've not just like typed it on the back of a cigarette packet or whatever. Make sure it's pretty comprehensive. And then you go back to the individual and say, okay, yes, now you can start the process of your handover. So make them think about what they're going to hand over first before they start doing it. Because you want to make sure that they don't just disappear off into the nowhere land, come back and say, I've done my handover. And you go, okay, great. You know, and they say, yeah, I'm signing to say I've done my handover. Off they go. And then 2 weeks down the line, a client calls you and says, where's this, where's that, where's the other? Because they hadn't handed over anything. So you can leverage the fact that they're still an employee. You can ask them out of goodwill, because ultimately it's their reputation of the legacy they leave behind. Now, another kind of more cheeky one that you could use is that you can offer to be a referee for the person during the termination meeting or soon thereafter. And say, look, if you have any future employers, I'd be happy to be a referee for you. Now, of course, now that's in their mind that you're their referee. Are they going to want to leave a trail of destruction for you, or are they going to want to leave a nice, neat, perfect playing field for you to move forward from? So there's little things that you can use. They are still an employee. They are still bound by confidentiality, things like that. But also you're more than happy to be their referee. And as a gesture of goodwill, if we work together in this handover process, and we agree everything that's going to be handed over first, and then you go ahead and do the handover, and then we get proof the handover's done, you're free to go and enjoy your garden leave. So it's very much in how you deliver that. Okay. What's better after, to leave the employee working during his or her notice period or release them immediately? I would say if you have to have them there, like if they've got a handover to do, if you don't have a replacement or you didn't have anything lined up of how you're going to do take on their duties, don't have the meeting yet. I would always have a termination meeting with the view that that person, after that meeting, their brain stops, they don't want to work for you anymore, right? That's the worst case scenario, and they become an antagonist for you. So what you need to do is do all the preparation up front. If, for example, the person leverage the handover process, agree the responsibilities that are going to be handed over, then they're handed over, I would try and get them released as quickly as possible. And if you're bound to keep paying them salary under the notice period, yes, you have to keep paying them their salary. If they ask to reduce their notice period, so say, for example, you make someone redundant and they've got a 3-month notice period in their contract, and it gets to a month in and they've got an offer from another employer, technically, there is compensation in lieu of notice that they need to pay you. Most employers just waive that and say, yeah, just go. If they find another job and then say, oh yeah, and you can pay me my other 2 months, not happening, sunshine, sorry, don't have to. So I would definitely say, yes, you have to stick to the obligations within the contract that you have signed with the employee, but there are, again, different ways of leveraging that. And again, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you about that after, to guide you through all the little things that you can do to make sure that you fulfill your obligations and you treat people with dignity and care, and you make sure ultimately you have an advocate for your organization, not an antagonist. And there's like a parting point. I once had to make somebody redundant because something had happened, and it was sort of a, you kind of need to resign conversation. I hate to say it. And about a year, maybe 6 months later, I was invited to their wedding because we managed to remain friends through the whole process. So something to bear in mind. It's not the end. In fact, it's a process, and it can be the beginning of a friendship that lasts forever. So thank you, everyone. Okay, now I will hand over to Hayley.